I've always looked at this and says, does it merit additional investigation? Well, yeah. And we need to close it out as a source condition to make sure it's not contributory to what's going off-site that we know we've got. Okay, so from that perspective, you know, I think it's either some additional phase 2 work. What I would prefer to do is during building demolition and site development is get in there, pothole, do whatever, see if we can find some soil and dig it up. My suspicion is, Kevin, you know, and that's all it is at this point in a phase 1 investigation, is that if anything, it's a minor source, and I think Charlie and Walter have probably looked at this already and confirmed that.
Yeah, and we have borings, there's a couple of wells adjacent to that facility and so on.
Right, and that's basically what the phase 1 reflects is. It's a wreck, so
Yeah,
it's
of
gotta
course.
show up as a wreck.
Yeah, in a phase 1.
In a phase 1. The other one is, you know, yes, up here, we think that there's a former gas station, could have an impact.
Up where?
It's up in here.
Over there,
Yeah.
okay, probably down gradient from the facility, right?
It might be, it might
This is
go
kind
on
of
the
a,
bridge.
this is
It's
a
a high.
relatively high here,
It's a bedrock,
kind
well,
of, things kind of radiate, although this
it's a hydraulic.
this
high.
is moving across this direction here,
Well, you've got something that kinda goes like that, and
Mm-hmm.
then you've got this shifting south.
on this side, yeah.
Right, so,
And this is a facility that we're, that's under our supervision, if you will.
which one's that?
The 89, it's a dry cleaner that sits right here, I think, right
Yeah,
here.
okay, alright,
And it has a plume that's moving this way, and then there's a gas station that's a less trust here that plume is moving into. We've had chlorinated solvents tested over here
okay.
without any observable significant impact.
So from a development perspective, we know we've got the source condition here that needs to be dealt with, okay?
Well, here,
I'm sorry, here, and what we wanna do is building demolition and attack that source. None of that's changed, that was in the baseline scenario that we talked about back in January,
right.
okay? What we've got are some of these other what I'll term as minor wrecks, but we don't know that until we get in, hydraulic lifts, floor drains, things like that.
Yeah, those are relatively minor issues generally, but.
The other thing I think that's jumped the price is and in fairness to PCL, these guys are sitting there with a relatively limited database,
Right.
not knowing what asbestos, you know, needs to be dealt with in the buildings and that kind of thing, which is really, I think, exclusive to, you know, obviously the groundwater, but has a major role in what Gino has to put together in terms of his pro forma in
Had
order
been
to develop
considered
this.
before the asbestos in the building.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
Is it
correct.
gonna take encapsulation and demo, interior demo kind of? I mean,
Well,
is
it's
it-
all interior demo, because all these buildings go.
So,
Right, but I mean, is there asbestos everywhere pretty much, or,
There's quite a bit.
yeah?
Yeah.
so the
So
thought is,
pre-demo and then. demo.
anything that has to be done pre-demo, come in and do the abatement,
Mhm.
remove any, any of the RVMs, get all of it cleaned out, get it to a point where we can get a demo permit, and take the building down.
And frankly, what we're doing is, as part of the funding for
I
this,
can
is
see why that would bump the price quite a bit.
the revolving loan fund dollars, we want to attribute the abatement work to, we want to attribute that to those RLF dollars, because if we can't take the building down, we can't attack that source condition.
Sure.
Pretty much.
So we see those as, if you will,
Well, I think
eligible.
taking the building down is a pretty much critical aspect of your development, isn't it? I mean, you're
The
not
whole,
gonna
the
do
whole
it-
site, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, that's kind of, it revolves on that as well.
So what we're trying to do is get as much eligibility, if you will, of these environmental expenses into the RLF dollars and that kind of thing, which we have been told would be, the site would be eligible for that. So we wanna capitalize or take advantage of that in order to bridge finance ourselves through the environmental. And Gino's got the right approach, I think, where he's taken this site development and kind of split it into two, where he's got his horizontal development, which will handle the environmental, and then worry about the vertical down the road. So he really needs to get to the point where he can get infrastructure in the ground, site grading, that kind of thing, couple that with the environmental. What I wanna do is, and it's kind of a regurgitation of what we talked about in January, so if you'll excuse that for a moment, but design a materials management plan that focuses in on the material that we touch, that's exclusive of the source condition we know we've gotta remove here. And again, what I keep preaching to the group is, the big liability for anybody down the road is what happens off-site. And this kinda gets back to our conversation we were having before we started the meeting, is what can we do to alleviate or control that risk from a development perspective moving forward? In other words, we're gonna improve the site, we're gonna remove the source condition.
Right.
Are we gonna be held liable for what's down gradient, knowing that, yeah, we might have to continue monitoring. We may even have to go in and do some indoor air sampling and even some mitigation. But beyond that, what is there in terms of being able to control third-party liability, that kind of thing? And that's my biggest concern for this whole project, isn't,
Right.
I think the nuts and bolts of getting this done
I agree.
is manageable.
Yeah.
I think what happens off-site here is, to me, frankly, kind of an unknown.
You're saying that that's where the
Plumes, yeah,
The
from the
plume's
source
taking it
condition,
that
that plume's
direction.
moving down this way.
You know,
So,
if you
but
look
how
at
do
it
we-
from a
what
risk,
is-
How do we
risk
deal with these
standpoint.
ones?
But also, what occurs with the plume that's going on to the site from other people?
Yeah.
Well, they're in the same boat that
Yeah.
this property owner is, and in other words, you know, a plume that's leaving their site, they're responsible for. So, you know, it's the same situation. I mean, if there's some cleanup that has to happen, say for example, something was coming on the site up here, they would be responsible for addressing that.
On my site?
Sure.
So if we were to get into, say, water management or something up here.
Yeah, let's say you were doing dewatering, you had to dispose, or you had to nip these or something to deal with
Right,
dewatering waters, you know, that would be on them,
Yeah.
basically. So, to answer your question, it's sort of the same situation down gradient here. What we found is that the risk associated with the plume off-site is relatively minimal. We did do indoor air testing down here, as you know, you've seen all the data. We did indoor air testing here. You know, you've got 500 or so ppb in groundwater here of perk, you've got 250 or so here. That's sort of the trigger levels for us to be concerned about potential indoor air quality issues. That's why we went out and sampled, because the property owner wasn't able to. So we went and did it with EPA's help and found that there were really no significant issues. So, you know, from a risk standpoint, that's the primary risk that groundwater impact consists of, right?
But once you dig out,
Although, go ahead.
just a question, once you dig out the source,
Yeah.
doesn't that situation dissipate?
Absolutely,
Okay.
yeah, but it's gonna take time. I mean, it
Sure,
could be,
sure, sure.
you know, if this situation developed over the past 20 or 30 years, it could take that long to kind of dissipate, dissolve, and it's not something that I think the division would get real aggressive about. You know, we'd wanna monitor the risks associated, the potential pathways for
Right.
exposure, that type of thing. Thornton has, in the process, aren't you guys in the process of developing a intergovernmental agreement with Thornton regarding groundwater use?
For another site, this is
Right.
a property that the city of Thornton owns that has a former dry cleaner on it.
that's up here, 104th,
Mm,
It probably, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
That's the one.
But yeah, they're entertaining the possibility of placing some sort of, use restriction on groundwater, and through an intergovernmental agreement with us as a substitute for a covenant, restrict access to water and thereby potentially be able to do like a conditional closure for the site.
Yeah, so once you've eliminated the risk to human health from the indoor air aspect of it, if you now have essentially a covenant on everything that's down here by this agreement with the city, right, that you can't use that as a groundwater source, then that kind of mitigates your concerns at that point.
So
It's
with
like
that,
having a covenant on these down gradient properties.
okay, so with that being the case, I mean, I had always anticipated that any kind of an MFA here would be a deed restricted MFA.
Probably, I mean, you're not gonna wanna go to the extent, for example, let's say you take out the source area here,
Mhm.
you're still gonna have soils impacted above standard probably here, and maybe a little groundwater as things continue to go down over time. So you put a covenant on it with us, deed restriction, if you will, or that puts limitations on the use of the soil and management of the soil and all that sort of stuff.
Is there flexibility around, and I think I just heard that there is, around a covenant situation. Because covenants for developers, property owners impact marketability
Mhm.
more dramatically than a simple deed restriction. I say simple, but, you know, it depends on how that deed restriction is written and executed or recorded. But we would like to explore some of the, I guess, some of the avenues, if you will, around what we can do on site from the source condition,
Mhm.
monitor off-site.
Mhm.
This is all towards the, you know, the goal of achieving no further action status down the road.
Correct.
So that NFA status to us is probably on the order of 5, 10 years, whatever monitoring it takes to get that done.
Right.
Understanding that we would have deed restriction for groundwater here, and maybe couple that with the city of Thornton in this IGA or however it works,
Mhm.
is making sure nobody downgrades, has any
Certainly.
use of, I don't know what they have down here in terms of water right now.
And then also, I guess this is just more of a layman's question. Is there a set plan that says, okay, North Washington Place, if you follow A, B, C, D, E, F, G, when you get to G, here's your NFA?
Yeah, it's a corrective action plan, basically.
And that's where the draft conditional closure guidance and policy kind of talks about that end game of, once you've defined the extent of contamination, once you've remediated the source, once you've demonstrated the plume is stable or decreasing in size and concentration, you know, once you have your institutional control in place, once you've demonstrated that there are no exposures, you know, then you are potentially eligible for one of these conditional closures where the environmental covenant and institutional controls and other institutional controls will become the long-term mechanism by which to manage this site.
And that's pretty much the phase 3, or?
Well, that's after you've done the phase 3, you've done what work you're gonna do, you've removed what soils you're gonna remove, you've done whatever treatment you're gonna do. The conditions on the site end up being not dependent upon any further remedial action. Say, for example, you've got a pumping system that's pumping and treating groundwater.
Sure.
You know, if you have that situation, then you can't really get a conditional closure because you're still depending on a treatment system to keep the levels down. But once you get beyond that, in other words, once you're done with all of your phase 3, to call it that, you know, the remedial activities,
Sure.
once you're done with all of that, and you have, as Walter mentioned, either a stable or a declining plume, and you leave some levels of elevated on the site, because there's no point in chasing after that last little
Sure.
bit, you know, you
Sure.
can leave it in place, time will reduce it. Then you have the institutional controls here, the groundwater use restrictions based on the intergovernmental agreement here, then you're essentially done. It's not technically an NFA, but it's a conditional closure.
What do we do up at Margot's place? Do you remember? That's the one up at.
It's the same thing, it's
Same
just
thing,
not
same
called,
thing.
it's not technically a no further action, there's still gonna be periodic.
But everybody in the
monitoring.
banks and everybody treats it the
Trying
same.
to think, and it's
Yeah, I mean,
shopping.
as far as they're concerned, it's closure.
Oh.
So
So
this
I would
is-
refer to your
I think it kind of might be something like that.
criteria as being
This is with
closure, you know,
Dave
that you're
Walker.
granted
Sure,
closure,
sure.
whether it's conditional or otherwise, the
Otherwise.
bank doesn't really need to
Something
know
like
that, but
Yeah,
it's,
and I think that
And
basically,
this
you
is
know,
only-
if you can get
and
the
this-
closure, that's what you're trying to
that
get to.
mode,
And this is only
you
achieved
know, we
after we do
recognize
all the
there's
work.
contamination, it hasn't left the site.
This is definitely a 2 project.
I think there's an environmental.
Yeah,
It's a 2
generally, I
project,
mean,
it's a 2 project deal.
We're
See,
okay with it.
what we would do is, you know, you guys would provide us with a corrective action plan, what,
Right.
you know, Paul's group or whatever, combined with what you guys are
That's
talking
another
about
one
doing.
where
We would approve that, and what that's gonna talk about
once the
is
decision is
how you're gonna
made
do,
to
what you're gonna
take
do,
down the shopping center.
what the goals are and objectives are, what you expect to be the, you know, the duration, how long it's gonna take for the cleanup to happen, what your
So-
goals are, all that sort of thing, to get to a point where we can
Charlie, in
close
that,
it.
in that kind of avenue and vehicle, would you expect to see some level of modeling to predict what, you know?
I think it can be fairly rudimentary. I mean,
Okay.
you really just need to demonstrate that you're gonna get to a point where the plume will attain some standard, whether it be, you know, the current standards or some sort of an ACL that we come to an agreement
Okay.
on. You know, how you're gonna get there can be fairly rudimentarily modeled, but
I've seen clients burn a lot of money and time and effort and
we're not really
ourselves too,
interested in that, I don't
in
think.
that
Generally.
risk assessment
That's
type
Walter's,
stuff,
he's
so.
seen a lot more of these than I have. So. In
Of
terms of what kind of modeling to sort of demonstrate duration of monitored
Mhm.
natural attenuation combined with
Yeah.
controls and so on.
The ones I've seen are not very complex, you know, they kind of look at the trends in the data, statistically analyze it, you know, and then basically predict that, you know, it'll take 45 years to reach this point, or
Mhm.
when. And I've seen them do it, you know, well by well, so they have like an average for a plume.
You see, the problem with these kind of developments is Gino needs to get to a point where he can permanently finance.
Mhm.
Okay, that takes out a bunch of the loans, including assuming like a revolving loan fund.
Right.
Those permanent financing guys wanna see basically a clean site with little
Mhm.
risk, it's going
Mhm.
vertical, or it's
Sure.
already gone vertical, and they're basically buying the thing. Could be a REIT, could be somebody that just
Right.
comes down the road and says, we wanna purchase this thing.
In fact,
We-
there's two part. The permanent financing will come
Yeah.
prior to the purchase of the RIT. And in fact, what we're looking at is so far as financing, Paul, if I can just add in, this is my concern. We come in, we acquire the property, we think we have the enough funds for the cleanup, and we're stretched down to this demo infrastructure verticality.
Mhm.
However, it's tough to get financing, that's a never-ending story.
If it's a never-ending story.
If it's a never-ending story. We
Well,
want A, B.
Well, what we need at the end of the day is that roadmap that gets
Yeah.
us to a single
Yeah.
point where you guys, Charlie's writing us a letter that says either no further action or qualified no
Sure.
further action.
Mhm.
That's where we need to get to, I'm gonna say as quickly as possible.
Mhm.
And what I'm hearing here is through, I guess, source removal, monitoring, a little bit of modeling, maybe a little bit of risk assessment, we can get to the point where we can present to you basically a current site condition in the future that says we're at equilibrium or improving.
Mhm.
At that point, you'd be willing to look at a conditional closure that has
Mhm.
that kind of no further action terminology associated with it, or am I?
Yeah.
So why can't we get to no
Yeah.
further action specifically?
Well, if it's conditional closure, then it's not technically a no further action. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah,
no
You
further
won't
action.
get, what
and-
they're saying is you won't get a clean, no further action unless you meet a numerical standard, which is very low
yeah.
at that
Yeah.
property
May
boundary.
not be
You're never gonna
achievable.
do it.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that right
You
now.
might be able to achieve it, but it would be incredibly expensive, you know, it would be
And time.
money that would make no
Yeah.
sense to spend. If you-
Okay,
But
so,
a conditional closure is such that it says the work has been done, the property is now considered cleaned up.
Right,
And to the extent that it can be, you know, put to some useful, you know, service, we're not asking you to monitor groundwater quality. If you dig up soils, you follow a plan, so it'll all be spelled out, you know, what happens from that point on.
and so does this letter also dictate the type of construction that goes on the property?
no?
Well, and use,
Certainly as it
It could,
interacts
yeah.
with the soils and, you know, be
Yeah.
part of the management plan.
but
material.
end use, if you wanna build single-family homes here, they would probably say you need to vent
Mhm.
structures.
Yes, yes.
It would have certain conditions associated with it depending on the type of construction you wanna do.
Yeah, it's
Even,
gonna be
even
engineered
commercial, you
controls.
might wanna see
Sure,
venting and
yeah.
that type of thing. And we would recommend
Subslab
venting,
stuff.
and we've
Yeah.
talked about this before, cheap insurance
Yeah.
policy against
Yeah.
mold and some other things.
Mhm.
So
But
now,
those limitations aren't any more significant than probably what you would already.
sure.
place
So now we're talking to the bank about this conditional closure
Mhm.
animal.
Mhm.
And so we need to be deal specific as opposed to what they do in general, because in general, they don't do that. In general, they do no further action. I'm just
That's,
saying
that's what, no, that's what a bank typically likes
Well,
to see is no
sure,
further
sure.
action.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you can say it's no further action as long as the
The
institutional
covenant
controls are
conditions
present.
are
I mean,
complied with,
that's,
yeah.
that's one way that we say that quite often. This is a no further action contingent upon the continued maintenance and action of this institutional control. So you have the covenant here, and it's NFA. In other words, no further action is required at this time as long as the covenant is in place.
Okay.
That's different than what you said before. I like
Well,
that.
it's just, I mean,
It's
it's a
the
different way
same
of saying the
thing,
same
yeah.
thing.
Well, I like the way you say it that way.
Yeah. It is a better way of saying
But
it.
I'm here to tell you that, because I've been through this too many times, covenant is a deal stopper with a lot of bankers.
It is.
The term itself. Deed restriction is not. So what we wanna do is hopefully, and tell me if we can get outside that box here, is work with Walter and Charlie to get us to the point where we need to put a deed restriction on this. Yes, it's recorded, yes, it inhibits or restricts the use of groundwater, there's an MMP in place for handling of soils,
Right.
all that can be categorized. We do that all the time. The minute you start putting covenants are for open space. Covenants are for parks and stuff like that. They're not for these kind of developments. So I'm just
Yeah.
here to tell you that, and these guys don't like to hear this, I have to
Sure.
advise you that covenants are something we wanna resist.
Yeah.
And what we're gonna
Strongly.
say is that we're gonna want a covenant.
Yeah, so this is
A deed
the
restriction is not good
interaction
enough for us.
that's gonna,
Mhm.
these guys like covenants because they carry a lot of weight and they are almost taking
Enforceable.
they're enforceable and almost take an act of Congress to change.
Mhm.
Deed restrictions do too, but they probably don't have as much power, legal power behind them.
Okay, well then here we are, guys. We're here. Where do we want to get? Are we going to get the covenant since we can't use it?
Well, I don't know, this is where you need to speak to the bank, we need to prepare a covenant and identify what the future liabilities are, what those use restrictions are, what those future work commitments are, and some people, initially are afraid at the sound of a covenant, but then when they see, it says, don't use the groundwater, I'm not planning on using the groundwater. Oh, it says, put in a.
But
yeah.
Manage the
I
soils when
Sure.
you dig them up.
Can I make those same technical restrictions under the guise of a deed restriction as opposed to a covenant?
I think the Attorney General's office would say no.
In
I can't
terms of the
under
RCRA.
There is a state law that says whenever we make a remedial action decision involving one of our sites, it has to be a covenant.
Do you see that ever changing?
No.
let me ask you this: is this the same as for a monitoring scenario as it is when you're digging the dirt out?
The covenant would specify what you do with that dirt when you dig it up.
Yeah, it's
That's
it's
where
actually the
materials
covenant
management
wouldn't-
plan.
yeah.
Well, remind you when we're getting this letter, the dirt would have already been dug out.
Well, the source conditions.
the source
would be-
conditions
Yeah.
were already
You're
dug out.
still gonna have,
Yeah.
you're still gonna have some impacts at the property
It
boundary.
would be for like
above.
deep soil, or if you de-water, it might have a, plan for managing that material.
Or, in relationship to your soils question, let's say you take out this building here and the source area.
Sure.
What you have out here is you have a thin rind, if you will, at groundwater of impacted soil. Well, you'd have to remove, thousands and thousands of yards of clean dirt off the top of that to get at that soil. It wouldn't be reasonable or economically viable to go after that. You could, but it would be,
No.
unreasonable.
Yeah. Right.
So you're gonna be leaving some soil, for example, out on that southeast corner that's impacted above standard, but it's not doing anything, it's not
Because
causing
the
any
source
problem.
is
Because,
dug out.
Encapsulated
yeah, it's in,
within the
it's in,
soil
this-
itself.
exactly, it's absorbed to the soil, it's not going anywhere. It, over time, it will reduce in concert with fresh water, if you will, moving.
So Gino, then it's incumbent upon you to find a lender that has the wherewithal and frankly the appetite to finance, permanently finance a development like this with a covenant in
Yeah.
place.
So you guys understand that not you guys, of course,
Sure.
but the way the system is working, that this site may be undevelopable.
That's possible.
Yeah.
We're here. We're here at that
Yeah.
point.
I mean, it's developable, but it may not be financeable. and therefore
Yeah.
it's not
Oh,
developable. I mean,
so.
you know, from our perspective, let's say that,
If
let's
Santa
say
Claus
that,
came, we
let's
could
say
develop
you
it.
had all the money that you needed in order to develop this in your back pocket, it would be developable. In other words, the site
Yeah.
can be developed with it, engineering and institutional controls. There's no reason why this site can't be developed, other than funding and financing.
So this is a done dizzle.
Well,
Done dizzle?
Is it, yeah, because I'm a simple guy.
Well, my belief is that there is a funding mechanism out there that will work with what we have,
To clean it up and to develop,
yeah.
right? And what do you think that mechanism is?
You know, I don't work on that side of it, but I know that an awful lot of these properties have been developed over the last decade, and more so, because there are
Name one.
institutions out, well,
Name one.
what's the one that Rob's, you know a couple of them. The one up north and it's an old facility that has chlorinated
Name the other one.
solvents.
Yeah, people
There's
are buying
hundreds.
them. Yeah, people are
Yeah,
buying
these
and
properties-
developing.
Sure.
And maybe what it is that you need to persuade a lender of the viability of the project is to have this all spelled out. This is where you almost need an agreement with us, kind of saying,
Well,
you'll do this and
we need a
this.
cap.
A cap,
And
yeah,
that cap
where
needs
it
to
lays
say-
out the very steps.
The cap not only needs
Right
to
to the
lay out
very
each and
end.
every task, but it
Right.
needs to put a schedule to
Yeah,
it, because at the end of the day, I can give you a good example, it's in a different arena from these guys, but Stapleton, been working there for 12 years. They had feet of product sitting on the groundwater table.
Right.
What did my client, the developer for a city, require? Scorched earth cleanup to the point where they could build single-family residences, and that's exactly what DIA had to come in and do. We removed 3 million yards of material from that site, haul it out to DIA, or haul it out to Dad's, which of course the city partially
Sure.
owns.
Right.
And that's how we did it. We did a scorched earth cleanup. So it is possible,
And
but
you
it
could
costs a lot of
You
money.
could do that here, I mean, you could do that.
Well, and I think that's what we're proposing as far as this
Removal
specific
of sources,
condition.
yeah.
It's-
What
Removal
we're
of
having to
contaminated
deal
material.
with is what's continues to cross
Yeah,
out.
yeah.
What if, let's just play a scenario, what if we can get the 5 part per billion here at the property boundary, but we still have elevated levels known to be from this condition, still down gradient to exceed that 5 part per billion? But I've got it cleaned up in
Sure.
my park, can I get a no further action? And I'm not putting you on the spot, I
Yeah,
mean, this
you
is-
might get a no further action for your site, but there is a remnant plume that is off-site for which we can't give an NFA. When we say NFA, it's exclusively for sites that have achieved those numeric standards.
I've achieved them at the property boundary.
You have, and that's why, you know, depending upon what you have on the site, we might say for your parcel, it's NFA.
So there
Yeah.
might be an avenue as far as the lender goes to say, okay, I'm free and clear. Someone,
Yeah,
I'm pointing over here just because I don't know where else to point at the moment, needs to understand that that liability for what's offsite still hasn't gone away.
Right.
yeah.
And maybe there's
And
where
it
you
may
head
be-
down the
it may
road
be
to a
very
conditional
limited.
Yes,
closure.
yes.
Yeah, that's a possibility
Or
here, where you're
even
going
a
down
2-part.
a parallel path
Mhm.
of NFA for the site, conditional closure
Sure.
for what's offsite. You think that's got some viability to it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or even an
And then
ACL.
the conditional, offsite, that just goes to liability and not to,
Again, if you've eliminated the source and there's no plume feeding that off-site component, we would probably just say, just sit there and watch it,
Do some
and maybe
monitoring.
eventually
Sample it once a
say,
year.
it's stable, it's going away on its own. We might say no further,
Gotcha.
we might say cease monitoring, and rely on the intergovernmental agreement to restrict access to it.
and that continuous monitoring would go on for what, 2 to 3 to 4 years or 20?
Depends on how the plume
Yeah,
responds.
That's the
days,
unknown, yeah. And I mean, Charlie's right. I mean, if it was there for 30 years causing the problem, it could take another 30 years at least
For
to
it to
correct the
dissipate.
problem,
Yeah.
yeah. For
Even
Mother
though
Nature
the,
to do
right,
to
right,
do
even
it.
if the source, okay.
Sure.
So there's a way to skin this cat.
Well, yeah, I mean, I appreciate these guys sitting here at least thinking outside the box with us.
Hey, that's what we're here for. Think out loud together, baby.
We have an opportunity to address the source condition. I think everybody agrees that's the best thing
Yeah,
to do.
I agree.
So we don't wanna lose that opportunity.
Yeah,
Then it
we're-
becomes a
we're-
question of what we, you know.
We're very excited about having that done. I mean,
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
that's something that, you know, this is a dirty site. And if in the process of developing it, you guys can get it cleaned up.
Yeah, I think we
that's
can.
Great.
We think we can get clean closure
Mm-hmm.
on the excavation, let's
Sure.
put it that way.
Removal of the
Do,
source.
do we wanna come up, you know, and again, Kevin, this is where I'm thinking, maybe get with Godwin or whatever and say, let's put our, you know, subterranean stormwater storage here underground where I gotta dig a deeper hole. So I gotta dig a hole anyway,
Mm.
Dig
Let's
the
go-
hole at the location, clean it up.
clean it up, and then go ahead and put your stormwater storage there.
Mm.
So anyways, just food for thought, but
Yeah, I mean, if you can build it into your plan that you're gonna excavate that area anyhow.
Right.
it's an obvious.
So what do? You build a
Just
big underground
Built
tank or
A
something?
lot of vaults, a lot of sites put vaults in now.
Hmm.
Just because of the fact that, I mean, if you put a big water
Open.
storage pond, you know,
You take a,
Yeah,
take a
mosquitoes are
usable,
big,
developable
yeah.
area.
And where does this vault drain to? Is it like, you collect the water and then pump it up into a storm, no?
It'd overflow by, it's a stormwater quality
It's
pond
like
and
a
a
flow
vault.
through.
Oh.
So it would
Okay.
overflow with the the trickle channels, gets replaced by the vault and has an overflow to it, and just go out into the storm sewer.
Okay.
So that could be an obvious point of measurement or monitoring.
Sure.
If that were of concern. What we've got frankly is a closed system, taking just surface water to an enclosed vault that's discharging. I think it lends itself to
Mhm.
protecting,
Sure.
you know, that water quality as it exits the site.
Mhm.
So,
What happens to the sediment that's in it? Does it
gets collected periodically,
filter out and
yeah,
get
they,
sludged out?
it just gets mucked out,
Mhm.
yeah.
Mhm.
It operates the way any stormwater quality pond would,
Mhm.
just doesn't have all the weeds and reeds and
And
everything else.
mosquitoes.
So, mosquitoes.
Mhm.
So, okay, at least I've got some better definition here as to what you guys think might be viable. It's incumbent upon us to come up with a cap that says, here are the steps we're gonna take. And, you know, part of that would take a second look here
Mhm.
with current data at a rudimentary model and a little bit of risk assessment to say that we do or don't have an issue. That would lend itself to us coming back to you with a conditional closure approach at some point in the future, but we would wanna bound the site.
That's March. You've seen that data, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know if I've seen March's. Yeah, I have seen this.
Mhm.
So I mean, here you've got PCE at 32, which really is, you know, and here you've got it at 515.
515.
So you've probably got some preferred channeling and maybe even some bedrock flow that they've picked up there.
Could well be,
Have you
yeah.
seen a lot of that?
And then there's 250, I think, or 100 and something.
Well, here's 3160, but that's right there.
Oh, I'm
And that-
looking, what's this one over here?
this one here,
29.
that's at 29, this one's at 32, that's at 515, that
Yeah.
one is 2014.
Because we had a 250 in here somewhere, but I think maybe they didn't resample that.
Or decline.
Or it dropped quite a bit.
Yeah.
Looks like it may have come down quite a bit. That was at 250.
So these are just
at one point.
reporting the hits. Here's a 2410, but you see those are all,
That's on the site.
It
This
was
was
on
at
the
250 and now it's down to
That's a 20.
38 or whatever that number is.
29?
you know, I think Kevin and Gino, the thing to appreciate is if you eliminate these
Yeah.
you know, several order of magnitude concentrations, get those to go away, you're gonna start to see these drop.
Mhm.
It all gets back to
Yeah.
flushing. This
Yeah.
515 down here bugs me a little bit, Charlie, so we must have,
Well, you've got some sort of flux right off that
Yeah,
corner, I
it's-
think.
Looks like it's just,
or we may have the sanitary sewer. Yeah, have you guys done
Possible.
any kind of a preferred pathway?
We looked along the sewer where it joined into here,
Okay.
and actually we did find pretty high levels there.
Okay,
That's why we ended up having to do
Indoor air.
indoor air there. I
Yeah.
think we had like 25,000 micrograms per.
And when you say preferential pathway, you mean like groundwater flowing through the?
Storm.
through the squeeze.
Through
Yeah,
What
and I think
utility?
the
It's a little
sewers are
deeper than
probably
that.
much higher above the water
They
table.
are.
It
Well,
it
yeah.
could be a case of, when the dry cleaner was operating, you know, they dumped stuff down the drain and it flowed through the sewer line and then leaked out near a break and, so yeah, there's always the potential that, it's carried off site and then leaks
And then
out somewhere else.
And you've got nothing down here right
Yeah.
now, so,
The way you would test that is another well here or something.
Sure.
Just to see if there's actually, you know,
Some
something going on
connection.
between it or.
So these people let us come on the property and just dig a well and do our thing?
well, I mean, part of the corrective action plan might suggest 1 or 2 or 3 more wells. I know Walter likes wells. What we wanna do is just come up with a network of wells that allow us to continue to monitor the offsite condition, because we
Yeah,
know we're
which
gonna
is
come
there.
up here and
I
attack.
mean, you have what you
Yeah.
need
Yeah.
there, so it wouldn't require any addition.
We've got 2 of them here along this side here, we've got
Mhm.
1 here now.
Well, these are gonna go away, because we're gonna take all this out.
Right.
I don't know if, Kevin, I don't know if we're gonna get all the way down here, but
Yeah.
Well, that's what my thought is here, is that if you have them right along the border anyway.
And I think they have adequate monitoring showing what's leaving the site. They have like 4 wells in that corner that we think are adequate.
so
we've got-
we'd keep one of these, so if this 3160 dropped down dramatically after the source removal, that starts to make an argument for the on-site
Sure.
NFA.
Hmm?
Yeah.
And we've got these 2 as well that haven't been tested.
Well, if they're not showing anything, they
probably
probably either
clean.
didn't monitor them or they're clean. So, that helps.
Yeah, I think they dropped off because they were below
Can I
standard.
have that?
Yeah,
Thanks,
and I can send it to you electronically if you'd like.
that'd be great.
Excellent.
Okay,
So,
this helps me a lot. Now, what it doesn't help is Gino and his pro forma with Kevin, you know, as far as moving forward, but I might be able to input to Kevin a little bit on that, to get that number better
yeah.
enveloped
Because right now,
or bracketed,
This
I
is,
should say.
this is another thing that you haven't seen yet. This was the cap mod that they provided us recently. When they went back in and sampled the wells and the groundwater right in the source area.
And this
so,
building right
Right,
here,
right
yeah.
here.
right there. So this is that corner right in here.
Got it.
So they went inside, resampled all that to look and see where they're talking about injecting amendment into those areas there. So they're
What's the-
continuing to move forward with
What's their
their
timing?
CAD mod. You know, I'm waiting for a work plan. So they developed the data, you haven't seen that, I think? Maybe
You probably shared it
Who's
with me, but
talking
I just
about
never picked
injecting
it up.
amendment?
LT.
LT works for Jay Brown.
So they're still kind of moving forward with that
There's a current
process.
property owner.
Otherwise, we're gonna basically do enforcement against them if they don't do what they said they were gonna do.
Right,
So,
right.
you know, that's continuing to move forward.
Right,
We're
right,
not
right,
being
right.
heavy-handed,
Right,
we're giving
right.
them time
Get
to
So,
allow your process to
The
happen.
one thing you need to
but-
understand is that injection process is extremely expensive.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that might preclude them from having to do that is the revised cap coming into Charlie saying,
Yeah.
here's what we're gonna do as part of the development.
Mhm.
Repatriate that money.
Well, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So, you know,
Repatriate.
hey Jay, you don't have to go spend this because we're gonna go do this,
Right.
but you need to
You need Put that
understand.
money back over here.
Yeah.
That's correct.
But let me ask this question. If that amendment is installed, would that not help to clear these areas?
It could.
It's gonna be a very long-term.
It's a long-term thing, but
Here's
So
the
is
deal.
everything else.
Yeah, anything
Those
to do to
amendments
reduce
are,
it.
and these guys I think will back me up on this, probably the most misapplied technology in our business is these injection processes. They're expensive, but if the soil matrix, such as this, in this case, a clay stone with a bedrock flow condition, doesn't lend itself to injection
okay,
necessarily.
all right.
It might in a very small sphere of
Or
influence,
if it
but
were
not
a-
in a big area.
If it was sandy or.
Work a lot better.
Yeah.
Somewhat of a Band-Aid.
And that's kind of what I'm seeing here.
Permeability is
You know, the
next to
levels
zero.
beneath the former dry cleaner are improving, but offsite, they're still greatly elevated. So their Boss 100 is probably doing
Doing the job.
something there, but it's not carrying out beyond
Because
that
it's
point.
so slow, everything
It's
moves
slow
so
moving, yeah, and and this.
And it's still a source issue, it's still leaking,
And-
regardless of
and
how
there
slow it
probably
is.
Yeah, you continue to have
There is
fluxes
soil
through
outside
there.
the building that.
Right,
is
right.
contaminated, that they
Yeah,
haven't
because
injected.
you look at this and you look
You
at
know,
the.
there's stuff out
you look
here
at
that
the
they.
elevated readings
Can't
that
touch.
that you
Yeah,
get
this
in.
They're
kind of
not
stuff,
touching that.
just about all you can do is
Yeah.
dig it up.
That's 12,000.
And
And
it
that's
should have
what-
been, should have
So
been
this
done
is
10
really,
years ago.
Yeah, that's what made sense to me when he came in and said, no, we scraped this, we scraped, and now you have the
That's-
opportunity to
that's-
clean it
Yeah,
up.
we'll just get in there and take care of it.
What,
Yeah.
what would be
Truncate the
bad
flux.
is if these.
I think the key for
start
us is
flowing down.
Oh, yeah.
maybe that
Right, see how this is.
two-pronged
this is
process where
lower,
we might be able to address an NFA for what's here on site,
and this is higher
understanding
here.
what that's gonna
Sure.
require,
Start
we may
to
not
go
get
up.
there.
So
And then
that
looking
would
at
have-
some sort of a condition closer offsite.
Oh, I got you.
Because I keep
Yeah.
preaching to Gino, that third-party liability never goes away, and you guys can do very little about that.
Right, yeah, it's
Yeah, I
statute.
mean, that's just, yeah, that's just the nature of the beast, and that's somebody with, you know, you know,
It's that whole owner-operator concept.
Yeah.
You know,
you,
if you own it,
you impacted me, whether it's indoor air, whatever,
Mhm.
kids sick, you know, and you guys can't control that.
right?
No.
So let me ask you this, so what if, talking about this third party liability, we come in, we do the cleaning, and something occurs down here. I'm the new owner. I've done the thing that needs to be corrected.
Right?
Am I still exposed?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You are essentially.
So this is just a barrel of monkeys, huh?
It is. Or it's like,
There's no certainty, yeah.
anyone who touches it catches it.
Anybody who owns the site, i.e. is in the chain of title, is, even Jay Brown, you can indemnify him from here to eternity.
But
He still doesn't get off the hook
Right.
either. When the lawsuits start flying, he gets named, you get named.
the previous owner gets named.
Yep, the
The
people that own
operators
it,
that
the
do.
people that operated this get named. Now, who's got the deepest
Yeah.
pocket,
Yeah.
who's still around?
That's-
There's the key.
Yeah.
And so can't we bond against that?
You might be
You
able to.
might be able to.
Yeah, you might be able to bond around it, but what's the cost of the bond? So.
Well, it's, you know, I'm not, you know, I can't look at it like you know, the big car guys, whoever, we just pay whoever gets in an accident
Mhm.
and not fix the rest.
Right.
But I think that if you take the,
I can tell you, Gino, that in a court of law, you would probably come off looking pretty darn good to any judge or jury by the actions that you took here.
Mhm.
They would be pretty hard pressed to come back to you and say, you're the guy that caused all this, and you're the reason that kid's sick and everything else.
Mhm.
That said, you might be the guy sitting around with the deepest pocket at that point in time, and it wouldn't matter.
correct, which is why you bond around it. All right, so what I'm hearing is Paul has probably found a way to this thing by doing, well, I'm just saying, Paul may have found a way through this thing. Looking like the NFA for the site and the conditional for off-site, which is primarily monitoring and doesn't release me of any liability, basically.
Well, and know that NFA on site is possible, but it's a
Not
tall order.
guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed, because we have to meet that 5 part per
Which
billion
is
standard.
impossible.
17 at this point.
17?
Oh, is it
It's going to
17?
be-
Oh, is it going up?
It's gone up, yeah.
When did that go up?
January,
January,
February.
end of
Yeah,
January.
I gotta go read my regs again, okay. So
Well,
it's
it's just the
17.
groundwater quality.
It's
Renewal
5
is-
or 17. We'll apply the 5 number when there's like a municipal water supply well.
Oh, I got you, okay. All right.
But 17 for other areas where.
So is 17 applicable?
Yeah, we can
It's
get there
still-
from here. It's just,
It's just probably closer to digging up
Everything.
yeah,
this whole
we
area.
might have a
The
bigger
whole-
hole.
Yeah, the whole corner is gonna have to be dug up,
Yeah.
and that material would then have to be removed.
The question is, isn't it better just to dig it up? Or am I being flippant about digging it up? I
There's
mean-
sort of there's that whole concept of diminishing return, right? I mean, at some point, you're digging 10 times, 100 times more dirt just to get at that 1/10 or 1/100th of the dirt that's actually impacted. So
Why
you
can't
end
we do
up,
like the fracking, go across?
yeah, I mean, if you could, you know, get a little minor.
Unfortunately, with this type of a situation.
Well, and you know what, you
But
know,
if you can work it into your plan so that it's an area you're gonna excavate anyway for your
You-
surface water retention or whatever.
How far down are we going?
Or
well, it's probably 15 to 18 feet of it is some of the data that we've
say
seen.
something more in like 20 feet.
So say 20
Yeah,
feet, but the
20
reality of it is, and you mentioned the fracking, what, the other thing we could do is, once we've got that excavation open, is we could treat that excavation with the
Mhm.
boss or
Sure.
whatever.
Yeah,
Come
absolutely.
in with a heavy oxidant to just break up the rest of those bonds that are created in the
Mhm.
PCE. You break those bonds up, that will further enhance the removal. Now, you'll get rebound and everything else, there's a whole bunch of things that could happen. But the reality of it is, we might actually end up still doing some chemical treatment even following the
Sure.
Pretty,
excavation.
pretty standard.
To
Yeah.
accelerate the degradation in groundwater.
Yeah,
Right.
so, well,
I got it, that's the one-on-one.
What about, I don't know, we talked about this too, but, you know, if you're gonna dig a hole, do something with it, put a parking garage.
well, that's my
Yeah.
point,
Mhm.
it's something,
Yeah.
something to force you to dig a hole down there, cause you gotta dig one anyway. Do something down there that's gonna enhance your development
Absolutely.
with a deep
And
hole.
that way there's return on that
There's
investment.
method to the madness, we may not have to
You
fill
don't,
it
you don't
back
have
in.
to, you don't have to backfill it, you don't have to.
That changes the design, but who cares if it's.
Well, you gotta have stormwater